A very good evening and welcome back to all the guests who are here. So welcome to session 3 of day 1. If I can begin the discussions in the morning and in the afternoon, we have been mentioning that if graduation is the starting line of a new race, then the capital needed to run that race must come from robust domestic resources and a transformative private investment. So this session tackles precisely that challenge, mobilizing domestic resources and attracting productive investment, including foreign direct investments, to drive resilient growth and sustained prosperity beyond graduation. For graduating nations, the ability to sustain progress hinges on two mutually reinforcing pillars, which is a strong domestic resource mobilization and the capacity to attract transformative long-term investment. Unfortunately, LDCs face a double vulnerability. First, we have fiscal space is rapidly tightening, tax to GDP ratios remain low, public finance systems are stretched, and the recurrent crisis from pandemics to climate events have tightened budgets just as concessional finance and trade preference begin to recede. Second, external private investment is insufficient and often misaligned, despite FDI inflows reaching $37 billion in 2024. This is only 2% of the global total and is heavily concentrated in extractive sectors, offering limited value addition or technological upgrading, which are the very ingredients needed for sustainable growth. So these realities underscore the urgent need to reimagine our domestic resource mobilization and investment strategies and to integrate them deliberately into our smooth transition strategies. As the Doha Program of Action emphasizes, we must move beyond incremental fixes. So on the domestic front, it requires to broaden tax bases, modernize customs and revenue administration through rapid digitalization, strengthen transparency to ensure every additional revenue dollar earned translates into tangible SDG-aligned development outcomes. On the investment front, graduating countries must cultivate predictable and competitive environments, not just attracting FDI, but channeling it into diversified, high-quality and job-creating sectors. Emerging tools like blended finance, risk-sharing instruments, and strategic public-private partnerships offer promising pathways when aligned with clear national priorities. We have encouraging success stories like Rwanda's investment climate reforms to Bangladesh's industrial zones that prove that DRM and investment promotion, when working in tandem, can accelerate structural transformation. So in this session is designed to dissect these pathways. So I have with me an esteemed panel of speakers. I encourage them to be frank, forward-looking, and also solution-oriented. Our shared objective is very clear, that is to equip LDCs with the tools, partnerships, and the policy frameworks which are needed to convert graduation into a platform for competitive, inclusive, and sustainable development. If I could just introduce the distinguished panelists, I have the keynote address will be delivered by Mr. Mahmoud Meret, former governor, National Bank of Ethiopia. In the speakers lineup, I have Mr. Solomon So, who is the coordinator, Economic Policy Coordination and Monitoring Unit, Ministry of Economy, Planning and Cooperation of Senegal. I have Ms. Can I use your second name? Rauda Ibrahim Al-Nami, Manager of Investment Department, Qatar Fund for Development. And I also have Dr. Farzana Sharmin, Economic Affairs Officer, UNE, United Nations Economic Commission for Africa. It is with great pleasure and pride that I say that we have 3 women panelists here, so it gives me even more confidence to take forward this, to chair this session. I look forward to our discussion. Thank you very much. So I would now like to go directly to the keynote speaker, Mr. Mohammed. I invite you to take the floor.
Thank you so much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me to this conference to share Ethiopia's experience. And also would like to thank the state of Qatar for hosting us. What I want to do in this presentation is to share a little bit of Ethiopia's experience in terms of improving the tax base and in terms of attracting more private capital into the Ethiopian economy. But I would like to start by giving you a little bit of context on what the current reality is for most least developed countries globally. I believe most least developed countries right now are on the edge of financial cliff. This is what the IMF called the great funding squeeze. And the source of this squeeze, this severe financial shortage, has to do with 3 factors. First, interest rate in so many countries is rising up everywhere, and the era of cheap money is over. So even for the private sector, accessing external loan is becoming difficult. So this is one source of the vulnerability of most least developed countries. Second factor is the usual aid money, and aid money associated budget is getting smaller and smaller. I mean, a clear example of this is, for example, the fact that funding from the US has significantly been cut, and not only that, most European countries has dramatically decreased their ODA budget to most least developed countries. But the third and even most critical issue has to do with China. As you know, for most developing countries, and particularly least developed countries, the most important source of development finance has been China. But loan and financing, particularly concessional loan and financing from China, has literally collapsed. For example, in 2016, at its peak, China's global concessional funding was close to $28 billion annually. In 2022, this has declined to $1 billion. So development financing from the largest source of development finance globally, China has literally dried up. So what's happening now is not just tightening of financial condition, but a triple whammy of compounded impact on access to finance for most least developed countries. And this is what's called the great funding squeeze. And a good example of this is Ethiopia. Yes. So if you look at this graph, for example, this tells the story in a clear way. So this graph shows the net flow of debt in Ethiopia, and this basically looks at the money that's coming in against the money going out. So for the first time, we were able to reverse this last year, but if you look at it in 2023-24, more money is going out to pay out our debt than the money that's coming in into the Ethiopian economy. So this is very tragic and very stark reminder of the problem of that's happening right now. In other words, developing countries, what this graph shows is developing countries like Ethiopia are a net exporter of capital to the rest of the world. One would expect developing countries would be net recipient of capital from the rest of the world. But the fact of the matter is most developing countries now are net exporter of capital to the rest of the world. And this is partly because of the heightened external debt pressure. So again here, it's an important graph that shows financing from China, and as I said, external financing from the largest source of development finance, that is China, has literally dried up. For Ethiopia, for example, in 2016-27, annually, Chinese finance to Ethiopia was close to $750 million, around $1 billion. But last year, it literally dried up and it was zero. And the story is not unique to Ethiopia. I mean, this is also the case in most other least developed countries. So the other graph that we see shows, again, a significant decline of global funding coming from China. All right. So if you look at this graph, again, it's not just funding coming from China. Funding coming from multilateral financial institutions has also been declining for the past 4 or 5 years. This is partly because, as one of the speakers this morning was saying, in most developing countries, the development finance, particularly non-concessional finance, has been declining. And because of the debt restructuring discussion that was initiated by IMF, most multilateral financial institutions are also decreasing their financing to least developed countries. So this is mainly because of the debt restructuring discussion that many countries, many least developed countries are entering into. And as a result, again, multilateral finance for development has been declining. So if that is the case, then I think a critical question that we need to ask is, what now? If the old model is broken, then of course we have to forge a new path. And this path, as a matter of choice and also as a matter of necessity, is a path for instead of relying from others, we have to rely on ourselves. So as I said, this is not just a choice, but it's also a necessity. So a big pivot is needed, and frankly, this pivot, this new path, is not a choice, but it's a forced one. So to address this, I believe we should follow 3 strategies. The first strategy is we need to figure out how to raise money at home. And as I wrote this, we have to do significant work in terms of accelerating domestic revenue mobilization. Second thing that I will discuss is we have to make our countries, we have to make least developed countries a competitive place to do business. We have to make them a magnet for investment. And third, maybe even importantly and differently, and I think this is something that most countries should adopt, at least in our view, is we should create a modern way of managing our public assets. I will explain this point later. So let's break down these 3 points, which we believe are a pathway, a roadmap to increase domestic resource mobilization. In terms of, the fiscal policy aspect of it, there are 3 elements to it. The first thing is, to the extent possible, the budget deficit of most least developed countries should be sustainable. It should not at least exceed 3% of GDP. So sustainable budget deficit is one way of, having or putting in order our fiscal house. Second aspect of it is, to the extent possible, we should pay our bills with the tax revenues that we mobilize domestically. So in this regard, managing expenditure, pursuing a prudent fiscal policy would be absolutely, absolutely critical. And the third thing is, we need to put the fiscal house in order by engaging in a meaningful debt management discussion. So these aspects, these elements would help mobilize domestic tax revenue. In addition to that, at least based on the experience in Ethiopia, what we try to do is, number one, we came up with a medium revenue enhancement strategy where we try to exhaust all sorts of revenue for the economy and also improve tax administration significantly. So this is one aspect of it. The second thing, in addition to raising revenue, we also need to make sure that spending is targeted and that we avoid wasteful subsidy. In so many least developed countries, government provides subsidy in sectors that are not productive. For example, there is subsidy for fuel, there is subsidy for unnecessary in areas and sectors, and I think addressing wasteful subsidy and pursuing a prudent expenditure policy would be an important part of fiscal policy. And finally, one needs to have a proper and prudent debt management. So when we combine these three elements, I think we'd be in a good place to support domestic revenue mobilization. Now, the second pillar of the pathway that I talked about is investment attraction part of it. So most least developed countries should make their investment climate competitive. They need to ensure that the macroeconomic framework is stable and prudent, because that is a foundation for sustainable investment. So making the investment climate competitive, opening up sectors that are not open to foreign direct investment, making sure that investment attraction is strategic and thoughtful, and making sure that the investment that's coming from other countries is quality investment, and to the extent possible directed to productive sectors rather than the usual extractive sector, would be an important element in attracting global capital in our economies. Here, it's also very important to note that foreign direct investment is not the singular solution for our development challenge. Foreign direct investment could support, could be complementary, but it's not a panacea for development in most least developed countries. It should be used as a complement, as an additional factor to accelerate economic development. In any case, to attract global capital, one needs to have a competitive investment climate. Now, the other part of it is, and I think in most developing countries, focusing on the manufacture sector, on the agricultural sector, on the productive sectors would be absolutely important. Now, the third pillar of this new pathway to break out this cycle of external financing would be to look at our asset, the asset that we have in most least developed countries differently. In other words, we have to reimagine development differently. In most developing countries, the government has significant public assets. These public assets include, for example, public infrastructure, land, buildings, financial assets, natural resources. So these assets need to be viewed and imagined differently. There was a recent IMF report that basically says in most countries, the public commercial asset that governments own is close to 216% of their GDP. But again, in most countries, this public commercial asset is not seen as an asset. So to drive development, to finance development, we have to reimagine the way we manage public assets differently. And this is very, very important. And in this case, if we manage our public commercial assets differently, with better management of public assets, a single country could generate close to 3% of their GDP in extra revenue each year. This is more or less equal to the budget deficits that most countries have. So what I'm proposing here is, in addition to domestic revenue mobilization, in addition to attracting private capital, we need to reimagine and remanage our public commercial asset. And this is not unique to one country. In every country, the government has huge, significant assets. And I think the Ethiopia example here could be particularly useful, because what we did in Ethiopia is we created a national sovereign wealth fund that brought together all the key public commercial assets under one umbrella company to achieve better management of these public commercial assets. This morning, if we pay attention, the Director General of the Qatar Development Fund was referring about the need to work very closely with the private sector. And one important pathway, one important platform for doing this is by managing our public commercial assets differently. So in Ethiopia, we did two things. Number one, we brought all commercial companies under one management and managed them with clear objective of adding value. And second thing is we use these public commercial assets as a platform to attract strategic investment into the Ethiopian economy. So what I'm suggesting in this meeting as perhaps a new way of increasing domestic revenue mobilization is to look at our public commercial assets differently and manage them efficiently. And if we do that, we can actually generate close to 3% of GDP in extra revenue each year. And this will definitely help in putting the fiscal house in order. So to conclude, the world is changing, and we need to have different ways of addressing our problems. And for this, in our view, at least, there is a clear graduation playbook. And the lessons are pretty clear. First, each least developed country should have a medium to long-term plan to raise government revenue. Second, every country should have a clear strategy and an active policy in terms of attracting private capital in their economy. Third, we should use modern tool and modern platform to manage our public commercial assets professionally, and if we do that, we can actually generate, as I said, 3% of our GDP in terms of extra revenue each year. Number four, we should protect investment, and we should also pursue a prudent expenditure management, at least protect important spending in health, in education, and also public investment in key infrastructures. When you do that, I think we can break away from old model of relying on others and use domestic resources to finance and accelerate domestic economic growth. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr. Mamu, for your remarks. I think it will be a sense of relief for many countries who are struggling to find ways and ideas. I specifically am very much interested to learn further on the works that have been undertaken, and I do hope that there will be lessons for everybody of us to take back. With this now, I would like to call my next speaker. Which one is? Just a minute, okay? Done. Okay, I will now like to call Mr. Solomon, Coordinator, Economic Policy Coordination and Monitoring Unit, Ministry of Economy, Planning and Cooperation of Senegal, to make his intervention in response to these questions. Which innovative model have proven most effective for scaling up private investment, supporting MSMEs, and building resilient supply chains, particularly given the phasing out of concessional finance and trade preferences. Also, you could highlight what fiscal and administrative reforms best accelerate domestic resource mobilization, improve tax efficiency, and ensure that increased public revenues are invested in productive SDG-aligned sectors after graduation. The floor is yours.
Bonjour à tout le monde. Est-ce que vous m'entendez bien? Parfait. Merci beaucoup. Thank you. Je voudrais à présent vous demander d'utiliser la traduction, qu'on n'a pas beaucoup utilisé aujourd'hui, donc je vais m'exprimer en français. Alors, on me demande de m'exprimer sur 2 points, à savoir quelles sont les réformes fiscales et administratives, mais également quels sont les modèles innovants que le Sénégal met en œuvre ou entend mettre en œuvre pour pouvoir en tout cas mobiliser de manière très exhaustive les ressources endogènes au service en tout cas de financement de projets productifs et également en tout cas alignés aux ODD. Je voudrais alors répondre à cette question en vous présentant dans un premier temps le contexte de sortie du Sénégal de la catégorie des paiements. Ensuite, je pourrais répondre aux 2 questions qui m'ont été posées, à savoir les réformes fiscales et administratives, mais également les modèles innovants que le Sénégal entend mettre en œuvre. Alors, concernant le contexte, comme vous le savez, le Sénégal a élaboré un nouveau référentiel de politique économique et sociale, c'est l'agenda national de transformation, avec une vision de 25 ans qui va jusqu'en 2025, et puis également une déclinaison décennale, donc un master plan de 10 ans, une planification donc sur 10 ans, mais également une stratégie nationale de développement qui est le plan national de développement quinquennal, qui en tout cas priorise les secteurs que les nouvelles autorités en tout cas entendent mettre en œuvre. Ce référentiel est ensuite adossé à un plan de redressement économique et social. Parce que vous le savez, quelqu'un l'a abordé ici tout à l'heure, le Sénégal fait face à une crise sur la dette et un rapport de la Cour des comptes a révélé que en tout cas la dette du Sénégal, l'encours de la dette du Sénégal est beaucoup plus important que ce qu'on avait jusqu'à là. Et donc ceci a permis aux nouvelles autorités de réorienter en tout cas la stratégie nationale de développement avec un plan de redressement économique et social. Ce plan connaît 3 axes stratégiques, c'est tout simplement la souveraineté économique, c'est l'équité sociale, et en 3, c'est tout simplement en tout cas la rationalisation des dépenses publiques. Mais également, il faut le dire, dès sa sortie, le Sénégal a élaboré un rapport diagnostic qui est adossé au rapport diagnostic que le CPD, le Comité des politiques de développement, avait élaboré pour les pays qui étaient en voie de sortie. Le Sénégal a pu adopter en tout cas ce rapport diagnostic suivant en tout cas les priorités du pays et en tout cas les risques de sortie qui pourraient en tout cas nettement en tout cas désavantager le Sénégal suite à la sortie. Cette stratégie, elle est en bonne voie, elle est en train d'être finalisée et nous espérons que d'ici le premier trimestre 2026, que cette stratégie soit disponible. Alors, une fois le contexte replacé, je voudrais vous présenter un ensemble de réformes fiscales et administratives que le Sénégal a déjà mises en œuvre et pour certaines d'entre elles que le Sénégal est en train de mettre en œuvre. Il s'agit d'abord de la réforme du Code général des impôts, des douanes, la réforme du Code général des impôts, qui est tout simplement un cadre qui permet en tout cas de moderniser le cadre fiscal du Sénégal avec une réforme profonde, intégrant les secteurs émergents, notamment l'économie numérique, mais également l'élargissement de l'assiette fiscale, sans pour autant augmenter les taxes. Comme principale mesure qu'il faut noter de cette réforme fiscale, je rappelle que cette réforme des impôts et domaines a été faite il y a tout juste 3 mois et qu'elle en tout cas permettra de taxer à hauteur de 0,5% sur les transferts d'argent plafonnés à 2000 francs CFA avec des exonérations pour les petits retraits mais également sur certaines transactions électroniques, le relèvement des accises sur les boissons alcoolisées et le tabac, mais également le durcissement de la fiscalité sur l'importation des véhicules de tourisme. Concernant la réforme du Code des douanes également, elle vise à aligner la législation douanière à travers la simplification des procédures et également l'accélération des transactions commerciales pour améliorer la compétitivité. La dématérialisation également avec la mise en place d'une automatisation avancée et une dématérialisation intégrale des formalités. Également, cette réforme du Code des douanes prend en compte le partenariat en renforçant la relation entre l'administration des douanes et les opérations économiques en instaurant une relation plus équilibrée. Enfin, l'adaptation en se conformant aux standards internationaux, notamment ceux de l'OMD, et également à adapter aux nouveaux enjeux comme le commerce électronique et l'exploitation des ressources pétrolières. Comme vous le savez, le Sénégal est entré depuis quelques mois parmi les pays producteurs de pétrole et de gaz. Alors, une autre réforme également importante permettra en tout cas de mieux mobiliser les ressources endogènes pour financer le développement. C'est la réforme fiscale portant sur la stratégie de mobilisation des recettes à moyen terme, la SRMP. Elle permettra d'accélérer en tout cas la collecte des recettes fiscales en 2026 à 20% et en 2028 à hauteur de 22%. Comme principale clé, il faudrait noter également que cette SRMP permet d'élargir la base de l'imposition, de simplifier les règles de digitalisation, d'équilibrer les droits et obligations entre usagers et administration et de rénover la gouvernance fiscale. Alors, concernant les modèles innovants, également que le Sénégal a déjà commencé à mettre en œuvre pour permettre en tout cas une meilleure attractivité du pays, mais également pour attirer les investissements directs étrangers. Le Sénégal a mis en place en tout cas un ensemble de dispositifs juridiques performants pour le développement des partenariats publics-privés. On sait que les partenariats publics-privés constituent pour le Sénégal en tout cas un levier essentiel pour attirer les investissements productifs et financer les projets du nouveau référentiel de la politique économique et sociale. Et cela passe par un décret sur le cadre général de la gestion des investissements publics qui a été mis en place, mais également la loi sur les PPP, les partenariats publics-privés, qui a été votée en 2021 et qui permet d'unifier le cadre juridique, mais également de moderniser les procédures et de renforcer la promotion du secteur privé national. Enfin, le Sénégal a créé depuis quelques années l'unité nationale d'appui aux partenariats publics-privés et également le fonds d'appui aux initiatives publiques-privées, qui sont deux outils qui permettent d'accompagner les porteurs de projets de partenariat public-privé, de l'idée en tout cas du projet de partenariat jusqu'à l'exécution des contrats publics-privés. Actuellement, le Sénégal est en train de travailler sur la stratégie nationale de la coopération. Comme vous le savez, on est face à un environnement international extrêmement hostile au financement du développement, face à la raréfaction des ressources budgétaires. Donc, comme l'a rappelé tout à l'heure, je pense, le directeur général du Fonds souverain qatari, les pays doivent elles-mêmes, en tout cas eux-mêmes, entamer le travail de recherche de ressources internes avant de pouvoir s'ouvrir, en tout cas, à l'aide publique au développement. C'est ce que le Sénégal a compris et c'est ce que le Sénégal a commencé à faire avant même sa sortie de la catégorie des paiements. Et cela passe par, en tout cas, reprofiler progressivement l'aide publique au développement vers des secteurs prioritaires, et ceci suivant trois axes. D'abord, la valorisation du potentiel économique national, la coopération mutuellement bénéfique, la sécurisation des investissements. En deux, cette stratégie de la coopération reviendra sur l'optimisation de la recherche et de la mobilisation des ressources extérieures. Et enfin, cette stratégie de la coopération qui sera finalisée dans quelques semaines mettra l'accent sur le renforcement de la gouvernance de la coopération. Comme on l'a dit, le secteur privé est important pour financer nos politiques publiques et cela également a été compris par les autorités du Sénégal puisque une stratégie nationale de développement du secteur privé et de la promotion de l'investissement a été élaborée et elle permettra, en tout cas, elle s'articule autour de la vision un secteur privé compétitif, créateur de richesses et d'emplois, dont l'objectif global est de développer le secteur privé productif à partir des pôles territoires. Le nouveau référentiel de la politique économique sociale du Sénégal, en tout cas, a mis en place des pôles territoires de développement, 8 pôles territoires de développement qui vont accompagner en tout cas le développement au niveau territorial, mais également qui permettront de mieux répartir les richesses du pays et d'avoir un développement endogène. Et cela passe par des initiatives opérationnelles, un programme de soutien aux entreprises nationales, aux PME, aux start-up, aux GIE et des coopératives dans les pôles économiques, également un programme de stratégie de développement des chaînes de valeur et de compétitivité des filières dans les pôles économiques de développement. Et enfin, cette stratégie nationale de développement du secteur privé passe par un programme d'amélioration de l'environnement des affaires et de la liberté économique. Enfin, dernier modèle innovant que le Sénégal met en œuvre, c'est la réforme du Code des investissements qui a été faite il y a quelques mois, puisque c'est en 2025 que le projet de loi portant Code des investissements a été voté, et elle vise à moderniser, à renforcer le cadre juridique et institutionnel du pays pour attirer les investissements. Plusieurs réformes, en tout cas visant à augmenter les avantages fiscaux, ont été proposées dans cette réforme ambitieuse. C'est la simplification et la digitalisation des procédures via un guichet unique dématérialisé. C'est le traitement des dossiers en 10 jours. C'est les nouveaux régimes avec les investissements stratégiques et les investissements socialement responsables. Mais c'est également les garanties renforcées avec le libre transfert des capitaux, la convertibilité, la sécurisation des matières premières, mais également un meilleur règlement des différends. Tout ce dispositif, en tout cas, permettra au Sénégal, face, comme je l'ai dit, à la raréfaction des ressources, face en tout cas à la situation macroéconomique du Sénégal qui n'est pas stable, le plan économique, le plan de redressement économique et social dont j'ai parlé, toutes ces mesures-là, en tout cas, permettront au Sénégal de pouvoir réorienter le financement de ses politiques publiques en se basant sur d'abord la mobilisation des ressources endogènes et puis en priorisant en tout cas les secteurs productifs qui sont complètement alignés avec les ODD. Voilà ce que je voulais dire par rapport à ces deux questions. Je vous remercie.
I thank Mr. Sow for his intervention. It was indeed heartening, or it is educative for us to know what are the reforms Senegal is undertaking. We wish you all the best as you undertake these reforms, and I'm sure there will be many countries wanting to know how things are evolving, and it could be also a learning experience for other countries who are on the same path. Now, I move on to my next speaker, Ms. Rhoda Ibrahim, Manager of Investment Department, Qatar Fund for Development. I invite you to make your intervention in response to the following question. As the manager of the Investment Department, Qatar Fund for Development, which innovative models have proven most effective for scaling up private investment, supporting MSMEs, and building resilient supply chains, particularly given the phasing out of concessional finance and trade preferences for the countries that are graduating, knowing that Qatar Fund for Development is a very important partner for countries who are in the graduation stage? And also, what type of fiscal and administrative reforms do you think best accelerate domestic resource mobilization, improve tax efficiency, and ensure that increased public revenues are invested in productive SDG-aligned sectors after graduation? Over to you.
Thank you, Chair, for such a question. Qatar Fund for Development have been working alongside the countries to identify first what type of plan that we should proceed. And I specifically say what type of plan because we don't want to de-stress countries. We work with them in terms of their fiscal risk to ensure that any type of tools that we deploy is actually suitable towards the investment opportunity we deploy. We try to make sure that it is also part of their national priorities as well, because at the end of the day, we don't want them to deplete their own existing budgeting. We want to make sure that these kind of, let's say, collaboration is actually adding value and also enhancing their income generative aspect. One of the things that we saw that is very, very productive, and also how do we encourage such a reform, is to also to look at tax reform where, for example, in sectors that are under-taxed, but however, as well, to make sure that when they are targeting these kind of aspects, they don't also overwhelm when it comes to vulnerable communities. We advise as well in terms of policy, advise in these kind of aspects, but also one of the aspects that we saw that is more productive, especially looking at least developed countries, especially because QFFD has been one of the most contributor towards our share of funding is the LDCs actually. So we started working with them on creation of certain opportunities where we are empowering small medium enterprises. One of the things that we started creating is actually creation of VCs, venture capitals, along with impact investment platform. And this was done in North Africa, where we actually provided working and non-working capital towards the small medium enterprises, and also ensured mentorship as well, and other perks as well with that, to make sure that the small medium enterprises are actually provided through these kind of, let's say, working and non-working capital, but also their repayment is also recorded. Because what we did after is actually also enhance their eligibility when it comes to commercial banking as well. So having these kind of, let's say, collaboration, we found that looking at the certain small medium enterprises as income generative, empowered individuals as well within the economy, they are the drivers around that. When it comes to also looking at future opportunities, impact investment and blended finance was something that we always encourage, and we have been working a lot with the private sector to ensure that they come in as well with us. And one of the things that we started working on is us as a development or a DFI, we wanted to make sure that we are also a de-risker. So we also created a lot of opportunities where we come in first loss and also guarantees as well, along with what we provide in terms of blended finance opportunity, and also looking at institutions like IFC and MEGA and other that could provide these kind of, let's say, packages, because you cannot address one problem in that kind of context. It has to be a triple, let's say, bottom line approach to this opportunity. One of the things as well that we also noticed that there are a lot of the LDCs have a lot of natural resources that's yet to be tapped into. And we wanted to make sure as well these kind of, let's say, collaborations has to also empower these countries to ensure that they are extracting, refining and also processing within their countries. And most importantly, to act as a regional hub towards their neighboring countries as well. Because what we found is the most important part is the know-how technology when you are transferring between two countries and so on. And the beauty of south to south is where these kind of, let's say, aspect is really established. And we saw that this kind of connection is the leading way or policy that should be always on top of things, and localization as well. Looking at the opportunity where the fund can come in and actually empower local companies within the country itself, because it's not that just they are the income generator, but they are the one who knows their context and their solutions as well, and what could work better as well within the local market and so on. And what we found as well, when we are working with smallholder farmers and working on the level where cooperatives are actually part of these kind of dialogues, where we found the most impact of our funding actually and investment, and the return, the fund actually is always rechanneling towards other development projects and not as a return for K50, because the most important part of our investment strategy is the human development, and also making sure that every buck is actually being redeployed towards better opportunity. Thank you so much.
Oh, that was very wonderful. I got fully engaged. I mean, fully concentrated that I forgot to check the time also, but I am sure you're well within the time. Thank you very much. I think for many countries who are gathered in this room, the support of the Qatar Fund for Development is very, very important, and we look forward to the continued engagement. And I feel I'm blessed. There is a divine intervention, because I have been trying to think that I need to know a little bit more about this fund. I'm lucky that I'm sitting next to you, and I'm hopeful that in the next 2 days I'll get to learn more about it. So I'm definitely going to leverage on being sitting next to you today. So I look forward to this engagement. Thank you very much. I'm sure it is a lot of wisdom for many of us to reflect on. And hearing from you, I'm sure many of us will know what are the ways we can access such opportunities and also build partnerships as we leave this high-level meeting. Now, I will now like to call on my next speaker. Thank you, Ms. Rodwa. Thank you. And I would now like to call on Dr. Farzana Sharmin, Economic Affairs Officer, UN Economic Commission for Africa. So over to you. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much.
I'm assuming that the question will be, I'm passing on the same question, so I'm assuming that you will take it on from there. In the interest of time, I'm not going to repeat it.
Sure. Thank you so much, Madam Moderator. Allow me to thank first our excellent host and the organizer and for the opportunity to speak. And my question was, how can LDCs design an enabling investment climate addressing regulatory, legal, infrastructure, and digitalization barriers to attract and retain diversified, high-quality FDI for value-added industry, job creation, and technology transfer? I would like to take the advantage of being the last speaker of the day, and I would like to appreciate that everything that has been shared today since morning, all the measures like strong institutions, partnership, country leadership, each of these measures is relevant for having an investment-friendly environment. And we have to also appreciate the current context of declining concessional financing and the limited contribution from tax resources for structural inefficiencies like low tax revenue and tax incentives. So we have to appreciate the importance of these very critical international private financing options. And there are many things that can be done, but today I would like to propose a two-pronged approach. These are measures that are directly meant to increase the attraction and retainment of FDI, and the other measures are kind of indirectly supporting to the attraction and contribution of FDI by creating an enabling environment. And for each approaches, I will select just 3 action points for countries to consider. The first one, I think it came repeatedly, is to address the regulatory and legal issues. So we need to have a regulatory and legal overhaul. Investors need accuracy, transparency, and speed in terms of making the decision to start up, to maintain the FDI, and then to make the decision for the next portfolio investment. So countries need to then ensure this virtuous circle of regulatory transparency, the efficiency, and the speed in terms of giving the permission, registration, and continuation of FDIs. So a recent study showed that regulatory inefficiencies can actually decrease prospective FDI by as high as 20 to 30% annually in some developing countries. So it's very critical that countries factor in those issues of efficiency, transparency of regulatory frameworks, and some measures could be e-regulation and e-registration. And what happens is that when you digitalize those processes, it will directly address the transparency. Investors will know each step, and it will also address the problem of bureaucracy burden by speeding up the admin processes. And this will eventually create the investment-friendly situation, not only for FDI, but also for the local investment. Then the next step is the operation and the maintenance of FDI in a portfolio. And for that, the most critical issues would be the legal protection. Investors want to see that their investment decisions are protected from any sudden changes in the policies, and the contracts will be enforced. And for legal protection and enforcements of contracts, you need strong institutions to support that policy applications, to support that dispute resolution mechanism. There should be a regular review and revision of investment policies to strike the right balance between the investment rights for investors, say protection from any arbitrary changes in the policies, and also to ensure that the public policy objectives are maintained, say for instance, environmental sustainability. And in this case, I would like to add to what our keynote speaker, Mr. Mehret, has highlighted, the wasteful incentives. So I would like to highlight that one options could be targeted investment promotion. In fact, African governments are indeed giving a lot of tax incentives. A recent ECA study has shown that the magnitude of tax incentives in the form of foregone tax revenue could be 4% to as high as 76.5% of total revenue. And in many cases, these are actually not creating the intended benefits to the sectors. And in the contrary, when we have directed incentives, it is creating a much higher value addition. Another study from World Bank said that in those cases, non-targeted sectors are creating less jobs, and targeted sectors are creating 68% more jobs. So it is a very important tool for consider. And government can think about, instead of giving broad incentives, targeted investment promotion for targeted sectors that will be creating value addition, that will be creating a lot of jobs for the marginalized groups. And the last one is about that virtuous cycle where the countries would be attracting new investment. And I think the dissemination and the promotion activities should be evidence-based, based on the experiences of the already active investments. If the regulatory frameworks are strong, it will create the interest for new potential investors to come to the country. So this is about the first regulatory issues. Next, we will have to consider the infrastructure. There is a huge infrastructure gap in LDCs, in developing countries, and quality infrastructure is essential for maintaining the cost competitiveness. And infrastructure means infrastructure in energy, transport, and network logistics, so that it can directly improve the competitiveness of FDI. And for that, we need investment, and infrastructure investment is usually long-term, and it needs a lot of money, and it is risky. So we have to tap into the multilateral development banks and blended finance. I think it also came repeatedly. And through this process, it will be possible to de-risk these investments and also to increase the bankability of those projects. So one aspect is to explore targeted interventions. I would like to propose considering financing for just energy transition, for instance. This could be a very useful kind of an intervention. So when the countries will be investing in energy infrastructure, this is supporting the potential investors by reducing the cost, but it also increases the climate sensitivity issues by increasing most likely modern energy, clean energy, and energy efficiencies. And through the process of just transition, it will also bring in all the people, job creation for the marginalized groups, women empowerment, and so on. So it will be the holistic approach, the integrated approach that I think came out quite strongly in the discussion today. The next one is the digital connectivity. A 2021 UNIDO report suggested that LDCs are one of the least connected regions in the world, and the connection rate is 20% of the total population. So it's a huge gap which needs to be bridged, and for that, government can actively think of investment in broadband connectivity. Say it could be in industrial parks, it could be in special economic zones. And I would like to also propose a very unique approach, which is the digital public infrastructure. And if I read out, is essentially investing in data exchange, digital payment systems, and digital identity as a tool for public and private sector development. So the third factor, which are directly contributing to the attraction and retainment of FDI, is the technology transfer and job creation through an integrated process. I think it came out quite strongly that there should be an integration of everything, all the aspirations in the National Development Plan, so that it is actively considered for, it is actively budgeted for, so that we can ensure the implementation of those strategies. And at the core of attracting FDI, I think we have to reflect on the very important thing of the complementarity of local investment, ensuring that it is linked with the local government and it is creating jobs. And for that, we need to consider FDI as not only a source of capital, but as a tools for technology and skills transfer. And technology transfer is not automatic. We have to create the local capacity. And to create the local capacity, we need skills development. We have to have the human capital ready for having that technology already adopted in the country. And for that, countries need to invest in vocational training, and countries need to also have the appropriate policies in place so that they can decide on the appropriateness of national policies, and they can also decide on the appropriate measures to ensure local adoption and adaptation. And there is a need for also ensuring that there are backward and forward linkages between the foreign affiliates and the domestic small and medium-sized enterprises. And I think there was the previous keynote speaker who was saying about the lack of integration of climate sensitivity and disaster risk reduction, and I would like to join in your opening speech and give the example of Rwanda's investment climate reforms. Rwanda has been eligible for, it has been considered for the graduation process for the first time, and the government is already taking some initiatives. For instance, measures like green finance facilities with an updated climate action plans and a new country platform to coordinate different initiatives and attract investor, private sector investment. And the country also has a Smart Rwanda Master Plan and Digital Vision 2050. So we can say that there is an integration of different policies to make the FDI as a tool for climate sensitive development. So these are all the direct policy measures. For the indirect measures, in the interest of time, I will be very brief, but I think these are all repeatedly highlighted. Our keynote speaker, Mr. Mehret, also said macroeconomic stability. I think macroeconomic stability is the foundation for enabling the government to invest in social protection, to invest in skills development, to invest in strong institutions through fiscal space. And also, macroeconomic stability will also ensure the investors' confidence to then attract foreign investment to support domestic investment. So macroeconomic stability is needed, and in Africa particularly, we have a tendency of pro-cyclical measures. I think counter-cyclical measures with the right mix of fiscal and monetary policies will be critical to create that enabling environment. The next one is in line with what many speakers are saying. We know that concessional financing will be declining. We know that domestic resource mobilization only will not be enough to bridge the financing gap. So we need an overarching financial architecture reform. We have to tap into the right balance of domestic resource mobilization, but we also have to explore private financial options. And for that, tapping into civil commitment, tapping into UN tax convention are some measures, but it has to be complemented by deepening of domestic capital market, increasing the contribution from domestic sectors like issuing the local currency bond markets, and national and regional stock exchanges could be considered. And finally, I would like to really highlight what we have been hearing since morning, partnership. This is an era of connection. This is an era of partnership, and no country can actually build the proper investment-friendly climate on its own. So partnership among the North-South, South-South, and triangular cooperation will be critical to have that investment-friendly environment. And I would like to end with highlighting the fact that an integrated approach involving all the stakeholders to ensure that the local linkages are established to ultimately contribute to the structural economic transformation will be key. Thank you so much.
I thank Dr. Sharmin for your interventions. So with this, we conclude the panelists' intervention. So I would now like to hand over the floor. I invite excellencies and colleagues in case you all have any additional remarks, and then I can open the floor for discussion, questions from the floor. So I think first I'll go for questions from the floor, so then it could be the additional remarks could come as responses. Also, it could be, we can conclude with the additional responses from my colleagues here. So any questions from the floor? Plus, I can see, so sorry, please can you introduce yourself and proceed with the question.
Thank you very much. My name is Tafaretas Facho. I'm a member of CDP, Committee for Development Policy. First of all, thank you, moderator, and thank you also for the presenters and the keynote speaker. I think this is a critical area work for LDC graduating or otherwise finance. And the keynote speaker raised a number of very important issues. He started by highlighting the great funding squeeze. I think that's a very important point, given what's happening with ODA, and FDI actually has gone down, and debt has become problematic, as he explained. The three areas he raised, raising revenue is one solution for graduating LDCs. Another one is, of course, managing on the expenditure side. On raising revenue, either you reform tax or you raise taxes. And raising tax has its own problems. That's why I think governments opt for managing expenditure, which has its own problems, because then you start cutting on expenditure and infrastructure, education, health, and growth suffers. And then, of course, he highlighted the third point, which is very important, debt management, including through debt restructuring. What I would like to ask there is that he highlighted the right thing, but concessional loans, either from Paris Club or from China, has gone down. Concessional loans actually from Paris Club for LDC has gone down from 28% down to 6%. That's why they are relying now increasingly on commercial lenders, and hence the high interest rate, and hence this leakage that they're paying more than they're receiving. So my question is the following. I think on debt, I think the major problem on debt is that governments continue to regard external debt as fiscal problem or fiscal crisis. I think it's much more fundamental than that. I think it's a development crisis. That's why persistently they are in this debt trap, because you try to do swap arrangement or some relief or suspension of debt, and then back again onto heavy debt. So I think it's better to look at external debt as a development problem, a signal that there is underinvestment in product capacity, underinvestment in infrastructure, and inability to produce the type of goods and services that countries need to export and pay their debt. The problem is not debt. I mean, the whole world lives on debt. The problem is how to pay it. So that's my question. I mean, shouldn't we be starting to look at external debt more as a development challenge so that we address it differently? Thank you.
Thank you. I will now, Your Excellency.
Good afternoon to everyone. I think it was a very good presentation. Thank you, moderator, for an excellent session. The keynote speaker mentioned about certain things, especially the fiscal deficit. I think one needs to differentiate between the recurrent expenditure and capital expenditure. That was not clear in presentation. The golden rule is that over the economic cycle, government should borrow only to invest and not to fund the recurring expenditure. That is the most important part, because government cannot spend enough on the socially desired sectors like education and health otherwise. And that creates the crowding in effect rather than crowding out effect, because if government invests in productive areas, that creates profitability for the private sector as well. So government expenditure is not always crowding out. The government expenditure can also be crowding in if that is managed. So that leads me to the question of debt, as Tess was mentioning. Debt can be good or bad. Without debt, I mean, any private sector you look at, the investment happens through debt, creating debt. The problem is in the case of government, the borrowing is done irresponsibly. And when it even comes to the external debts, I'm sorry to say this, our development partners also push debt which are bad debts. So they are also not behaving responsibly. There is a UN principle, UNCTAD principle of responsible lending and borrowing. So because they come, they have to know their annual, the target they have to lend, and so they come, and a lot of projects in Bangladesh we find are badly designed, and they are externally funded, and then the design was done by the loan is pushed by the lenders, the development partners. They design the project, they create the tender documents. So it's basically supply-driven projects that eventually causes the problem. So I think that is a very important thing. The idea of public asset management, I think, is a brilliant idea. I think we should think about it, and we should think about the alternative sources of finance, not always donor-funded projects. So if a project is economically viable, there should be a private partnership, because it is if in economically, like you see in Bangladesh we have built a metro line, and which is really profitable business because so much demand for that service. Why should government borrow to build that? Instead, could have gone for a public-private partnership system. The other point that I would like to emphasize here is what Dr. Farzana mentioned about tax incentives. Unfortunately, this doing business report that World Bank abandoned created this incentive of race to the bottom, because that is one of the criteria to have your ranking up. And now we find that the tax incentives does not necessarily bring in investment. It costs the developing countries more in terms of lost revenue than it brought in investment. I think that is a very important observation that we should keep in mind going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. I think I will first make my panel members respond in case we forget the question and we go out of track. So the first question was, it was, I think, regarding the China's concessional loans from China going down, and the question was government to continue to think about, they should think about borrowing not as a fiscal issue but as a development challenge, and should it be addressed this problem separately? If you could just give some responses from your end.
Thank you so much. So I think, on these 3 points, I think one is on the debt, the second is on the deficit, and the third one is on public asset management. Just very quickly, I think on the date to finance development, I think somehow relying on external debt is, in my view, understandable. So I mean, it's very difficult to advise against exploiting and exhausting all sorts of finance for development. But the problem is when that practice is not prudent, then that's the big problem. As a representative from Bangladesh is rightly pointed out, I think in the past, much of the lending that was being advanced to developing countries, and particularly least developed countries, was supply driven. And many of the projects that were financed, because of, as part of this non-concessional lending, didn't really bear fruit, partly because of poor project management. So there are a number of projects that were financed, particularly through Chinese lending, but most of these projects were not effectively implemented, and hence led to a significant debt burden for most least developed countries. Now we are at a stage where we are trying to restructure these debts. And really, that's where this is exactly the place where we are in. So I think being responsible in terms of debt arrangement would be very important. Second point I would say is on the deficit, because that was raised as well. I think here the most important thing is not whether governments will have a deficit or not. I mean, having a deficit in and of itself is not a problem. I mean, every country has a deficit. Developed countries, developing countries, least developed countries, all of them have fiscal deficit. The main issue is not the existence of deficit. I think the main issue is how do you finance that deficit? If you finance the deficit through unhealthy ways and a way that's not sustainable, that becomes a big problem. For example, if in some least developed countries, the deficit is financed through what's called monetary financing of the budget, meaning they run to their central bank to finance their deficit. If that happens, then that will lead to loose monetary policy phenomenon and lead to price stability pressures, inflationary pressures. So the question is not whether there's a deficit or not. I mean, deficit is fine, but I think we need to find a sustainable way of financing that deficit. And by that I mean the source of financing for the deficit should always come from the economy, not from the central bank. It could be from the pension funds, it could be the social security funds, it could be from the banks, it could be from the public, but it should come from the economy, not from central bank. If that is the case, then that will lead to significant macro instability. And macro stability is a foundation for quality investment. So I think that's the second point I would say. The third point that I would also add is, if from this panel, at least from my own intervention, if I can manage to leave you with one thought, then it will be this one. Please think seriously, intentionally, purposefully about public assets. That is so important. You should not just rely on tax. We just cannot rely on investment. You should reimagine and reconsider your public assets. Every country has significant public commercial assets. We are in a country, Qatar. Qatar is known for its sovereign wealth fund, the Qatar Investment Authority, right? I mean, UAE, go to UAE, they have what they call the Abu Dhabi Investment Authority. If you go to Singapore, they have what is called Temasek. These are created out of public commercial assets. So by professionally managing this public commercial asset, you could generate significant amount of revenue for your economy. If you just, if you don't forget this, point, after the session, then I think, at least as far as I'm concerned, my job is done. Thank you.
you. Thank you. Any of my panel members would like to respond to any of the questions? Would you like to respond to any questions? You would like to explain something? Okay,
No,
please
thank you
proceed.
so much for the observation, His Excellency Anisuzzaman. We cannot agree more, and at ECA, one of the key recommendations were to have a sunset clause of any tax incentives that are provided to the prospective investors, and to regularly review the cost and benefit of providing those tax incentives, so that whatever the benefits were intended from the government's point of view are actually materialized. And we were also proposing to have it transparent, so that the institutions are accountable and transparent about the various tax incentives that are provided. I would like to also join our keynote speaker in terms of giving his responses to public debt management. And I think this is critical to have the public debt approach to look from a development perspective, not to just see it for the survival in a way. Public debt, the intention would be to create sustainability to the country, so that the country has the capability to then pay off. It should be gone to the productive sectors, and it should be transparent and accountable in terms of how much debt was received and how it will be paid off. Thank you so much.
Okay, thank you. Should I open the... Can I have your question? I think there was somebody at the back. You would like to ask your question? I think in the interest of time, we'll keep this as the last question and then close the session.
Well,
one more there.
I'll be very short. It's just maybe a statement. I'm rebounding on what our colleague was saying from the committee. Maybe debt should be also looked at. I mean, if debt needs to be contracted as an investment, more as a meaning that contract debt for industrial development, contract debt to build industrial parks, contract debt to build agropoles. Your debt you will have a return on your debt. It's an investment. So I think maybe it should be considered as this, but it doesn't go alone. It needs an ecosystem around it. It needs a structure, and that is possible when we build programmatic approaches. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you. Please, can you ask your question?
Thank you very much, Madam Chair, for the opportunity to speak, and also thank you to the speakers for the presentation. My question, or maybe comments, in regards to the last two presentations by the two ladies. Actually, I'm from Tuvalu, and I was trying to visualize how I can use what you've mentioned in your presentation, especially looking at it from a micro-economic perspective, and also from the macro-economic perspective as well, as mentioned by the last presenter, and how we can use it to visualize, or how we can put it in place for our country. Our country is a very small country, only 10 to 11,000 people residing there. The islands are very vulnerable to climatic disasters, fragile, and also very exposed to climatic disasters, cyclones. Even distant cyclones, which is 2,000 kilometers away, have impacts with storm surges on the islands, because it's atoll islands, low-lying islands, not more than 3 meters above sea level. So the impacts of those disasters can be felt very immensely by the islands. So looking at it from the perspective from our side, the context from the islands, geographically, and looking at it from the GDP side, or as per the income in macroeconomics. I was trying to look at how, looking at investment, what we've talked about today, and how we can instill and promote private sector development, of which they can boost the economic aspects. And I'm wondering how we can fit in that model, of which the macroeconomic model. We talk about a lot of broad investments, private sector developments, consumption, government expenditure, and all these other aspects when you look at it from the macroeconomic model. So I'm trying to see how we can fit into these small island states. And I think I will have an opportunity later on after this session to talk more with the last two presenters on how we can put that into context for our small island states and see the gaps and how we can expand or improve on those, because we are looking at it from the economic side. We're talking about income, we're talking about GDP, but also we have to look at the resilience side, how we can build resilience for the small island states. And if we include this resilience, will it change the thresholds when we look at the income, if we were to incorporate into the models and all these other thresholds that we have? Sorry, Madam Chair, I'm taking too much time, but I think I can talk more with the other two presenters after this session. But those are some of the questions or maybe comments that I wish to put forth. Thank you.
Thank you very much for your remarks. I'm sure every input provided in this session will always be food for thought for not only you all, but even for us sitting here. So we always welcome such remarks, interventions, questions, clarifications, comments, anything. I would like to open the floor for my colleagues here if they would like to respond or make any statement before I wrap up. One last round. It can be while there has been a very time-consuming statement saying he will take it up after the session. But in case there is any, I would first like to request you, do you have anything to say? I'll give you 1 minute.
Yes, very briefly, I fully sympathize with the huge resilience issues that the small island countries are facing. And one way is to tap into the global partnership. We have the ABAS platform for all the seats. So Tuvalu can really tap into that platform to have the global partnership in increasing the resilience. And we can have a very targeted approach to keep climate resilience deeply inbuilt in the national development plans of Tuvalu. And we can also consider thinking about raising specific financing tools that can address the sustainability, climate vulnerability issues, at the same time raise financing for macroeconomic stability. One particular example is from our member states, Seychelles. They have blue bond initiatives that is directly addressed increasing sustainability for their economy, but we can talk more about it. It's 1 minute was short to answer to your question. Thank you so much for this question.
Thank you. Now, Ms. Rhoda, if you would like to say a few things.
Thank you so much. I will just give a general statement around debt, sustainability, and so on. QFFD actually backs the international efforts to create a sovereign debt framework which promotes development goals and also alongside with it inclusive and equitable principle, because the role of DFI should always be within that kind of, let's say, perspective, and also making sure that these kind of, let's say, participation with an architecture that provide flexible and concessional and impact-driven financing which support national debt profiles instead of overwhelming them. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Would you like to make a statement? Any closing remark? 1 minute.
Merci beaucoup. Alors, je vais faire très rapidement. Je voulais juste aborder la question de la dette qui est très largement revenue dans les échanges. Et c'est pour dire que c'est une question qui mériterait, en tout cas, qui mériterait plus d'attention pour non seulement pour les partenaires, mais également pour les pays emprunteurs, puisque cette dette, la question qui devrait être posée, c'est l'utilisation de la dette. Une dette qui ne crée pas de la croissance, une dette qui n'est pas investie vers les secteurs productifs, vers le capital humain, de sorte à que ça puisse être créé en tout cas des revenus. Crescendo deviendra en tout cas une dette insoutenable. Et je pense que cette question également devrait être en tout cas prise très au sérieux, aussi bien par les partenaires, les emprunteurs, mais également par les demandeurs. Merci beaucoup.
Thank you. Last but not the least, Mr. Mohammed. Okay, thank you very much. So let me, now I would like to thank the panelists, keynote speakers, and audience for your interventions. This session, if I wrap up, has highlighted many crucial points, but in the interest of time, I will just reiterate 4 key messages that were sounded out either through the questions or through the speakers. It is very important that all countries should emphasize on accelerating greater domestic resource mobilization through broadening tax base, digital customs, digitalizing the customs, and enhancing revenue administration, among others. Also a need to create more predictable and competitive environment for investments, including FDI. To do so, focus should be on innovative financing windows such as blended finance, private guarantee schemes, and strategic public-private partnerships should also be leveraged. I think it has been stressed more than enough that prudent management of public commercial assets is also one area that we could look into, and nevertheless, investment in productive areas such as education and digitalization are also indispensable, and so we have to mobilize capital and enhance financial efficiency. Countries should also focus on legislative and regulatory reforms to boost investor confidence and actually increase investment. Nevertheless, we should also not forget that tax incentives should be, it was highlighted that it should be, sunset clause should be there. We should look at whether the tax incentives are pro-growth, or is it just another way of, just may not be, it may be a wasteful expenditure for the government, meaning not productive investments. So if I could share a few things about Bhutan, where there are many concerns, I would like to conclude by sharing Bhutan's example. Our constitution is very clear. We are not allowed to spend on current expenditure from any borrowings. It's very, very clear. We have to, any current expenditure has to be met through the domestic revenue. It is laid out in our constitution. Also, when we look at our borrowings, because we have to borrow a lot, we are a very small economy which is landlocked, and what we have realized is that in our accounting, which we do, the oversight international organizations do make comments on, is that sometimes our borrowings look very high. But what we have done is try to segregate the borrowings which are for hydro, because our hydropower investments are very high. So we keep the borrowings for the hydro investments separately. We account it separately. So what happens is it then shows where the investment, where the borrowings are really used. That is also for transparency and accountability. With this, I would also like to state that yes, all countries are different. One size doesn't fit all. For some island countries like us, landlocked countries, we need different interventions. I also personally remember during my time when somebody made the example of ease of doing business. I remember a time when I told the World Bank that when the ease of doing business for Bhutan at that time, the rating was not very good. And we were trying to find out why. But it was only because we depend on India, Kolkata as our port of entry. but we have no control over how things are done there. So these are some things which do have different situations for different countries, and I'm sure at the end of the day we all can reach out to each other, support each other, learn from each other, and benefit not only our individual countries but also the globe, or the globally as a whole. So all the best, and thank you very much. I have gone above time by 13 minutes. Sorry, it was supposed to conclude at 5. Thank you very much.